Chelsea Zaccato.
And I'm Natalie Heacock.
And this is Lumber Slingers.
Each podcast, we will be bringing you relevant and useful industry information, including interviews with top lumber professionals and discussion of current events in the industry.
Whether it be lumber grading, industry and market trends, or who's who in lumber, we hope to extend your current tally on industry knowledge.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. We are so excited today to bring you this episode of Lumber Slingers. We have our first celebrity guest, in my opinion. We have Miss Joanna Foat, who is an author and has done a ton of research on Britain's forgotten army, which we call the LumberJills. And thank you so much for joining us today, Joanna.
You're welcome. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Did I say your last name right?
Yes, Foat. Yeah.
Foat. Okay.
And if you've been watching our YouTube videos, you may have been seeing us with the book quite often in our intros.
Yay!
Yay! Very happy to have a copy of this. And you're so sweet that you signed it for us.
Yes.
No worries. Yeah.
Well, Joanna, could you tell us give us a little bit of background of your career path and what led you to maybe getting into this really cool piece of history?
Yeah. Okay. So I went to a state school and I studied psychology at university, but really because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then kind of ended up going into PR and communications. And it was eventually a job that I got at the Forestry Commission, which is like the kind of governmental organisation kind of owning and running all the forests across the UK. And I was working for them. And that's kind of where it started. But I think, my interest sort of it was not kind of academic, kind of the whole kind of history thing and forestry thing and LumberJills things. It was more kind of like this passion within me that was there ever since I was a kid. I remember watching Tarzan, the black and white Johnny Weissmuller, and I absolutely loved watching him, and I just wanted to wrestle with alligators and swing through the trees like him. And the thing I really loved about him was that he wasn't he couldn't really talk because he didn't have the language, did he? And I was like a super shy child, and so that made me feel really great that he could be so cool, and yet he couldn't. He was seemed quite shy to me. So I loved that, and I then went on to climb trees and be quite adventurous. I played football at uni and kind of so.
Wow.
I was always referred to as a tomboy when I was younger, which I thought was kind of strange because I just liked doing those things, And then, so I was working at the Forestry Commission, and my boss said to me one day he was really proud of his all-female management team, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. He's supporting the women that are working for him, celebrating the women. I'd never heard that at work before. And so I thought, that's really interesting. And, he was also a real great advocate for, get out there, Joe, find some great stories. And so he gave me a lot of kind of long rein to go and kind of find stories. So I was like, how about a story about women in forestry? That would be really interesting. And I wanted to pitch it to BBC Radio 4 Woman's Hour because I thought that would be great. But I really didn't have a story for them at the time. There was no initiatives to encourage women into forestry. There was no money being spent on that kind of thing. So I kind of drew stumps. But I didn't want to give up. And I just heard this bit of a story about... I phoned this lady in Human Resources in Scotland, Forestry Commission in Scotland. They have loads of trees and loads of forests. They know their stuff. And so I phoned her up and I said, is there anything new happening in forestry in this country? And she literally just laughed at me and she was like, new? Women in forestry is nothing new, Joe. They've literally been doing in their thousands since World War I and World War II. And they were called LumberJills. And I just thought, what? Thousands of women? How can I not know about...
I just got goosebumps.
I was like, how can I not know about thousands of women that have been doing this job? I work with loads of female foresters, and I asked them about it, and they were like, no, never heard of them. I was like, what, you've never like been taught about them? And they were like, no. And it was a really hidden story. I looked in history books, there was hardly anything. I looked online, there was like one website from a Scottish lumberjill, and that was about it. And I just thought, my God, I really want to know like what those women did in the wartime, because thousands of women, that's a lot of women to forget, right?
Yeah.
And and also it made me think of this time when I was in my early 20s, and it was Christmas, and my dad was really excited. He wanted, he bought me a present that year, and he like went outside, and I was like, okay. Went into the shed, it was like rummaging about, banging about, and then he came in all happy, and he like presented me with his axe, and he said, "Happy Christmas, Joe." And I was like, whoa, Dad. That's like the funniest present I've ever been given. But I really love chopping up wood for the fire, you know. So, like, he knew me well, and I really loved that axe, you know. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, if I'd been born like 50 years earlier, maybe I would have been a lumberjill. I was like, that's not that long ago. And
Right.
yeah, and that was where it all started, really. Yeah. I just thought I really want to meet those women. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a really cool story leading up to how you felt about how, you would have been loved to be a lumberjill if I read that in your book about you as well. And so that obviously piqued your interest. And I'm just so curious, like, how did you, because there was so much history missing, how did you find like your first lumberjill and go, talk to her and get an interview and start building this history, this great history that you've built in this book? I mean, this is an incredible labor of love. You can just tell because of how many conversations you've had, the fact that you had to, track these people down. So what did that journey look like?
Well, to begin with, my boss said to me, "Joe, you really need to work on something else." I was like, oh yeah, but this is a really good story. She's like, I know, but there might be other things that are more profitable to work on, or better to work on. I was like, okay, well, I'll take it offline. I kind of do it on my own for a bit, and so I just did a lot of online research. I went to the National Archives, and I did find one folder on the Women's Timber Corps, and it said on the front in big bold writing, the sample folder, the rest have been destroyed. And I was like, what? I was so like outraged by it. I was like, what? Like everything else destroyed. I was like, okay.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So I looked in like other museums and stuff. There really wasn't very much at all. And then I know. I met this guy who had been campaigning for the Women's Land Army, and he'd, after 60 years, because they got no recognition at the end of the war, he managed to get them to walk to the cenotaph on Remembrance Day, or like near to Remembrance Day, for their own special ceremony, because that is like one of the travesties of the story is they weren't allowed to.
I read that they weren't allowed to be there for Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
And that
That's
was
so
more recent that happened, right?
Yeah, right up
That
until
they were able to walk?
2000, yeah. So it was like, 40, 50 years later. Before they kind of like got their own ceremony and were invited up there. So anyway, he was holding this event, I think it was 2012. And he said, well, I got in touch with him. He said, why don't you come along? There's going to be 4 lumberjills there. And so I went, and it was like really incredible, because that was the first time I met a lumberjill, and I actually marched to the cenotaph with them while they lay wreaths, and it was like the most moving, incredible experience, really kind of special. And then, of course, so I chatted to them, and I said, can I come and meet you? I'd love to come round to your house and chat to you. And they, some of them agreed, and so that's what I did. When I met a couple, I was then so passionate about it. I went back to work and I was like going, oh my God, this is so amazing. They're so wonderful. Anyway, cut a long story short. It just so happens that it was the Forestry Commission had the first female chair in 100 years. And she got to
Wow.
hear about the LumberJills work that I'd been doing and talking about, and she gave permission for a project to take place where they put up a monument to the LumberJills, but we also were able to send out press releases across the country from Scotland, all the way down to the Cornwall and Kent, say, calling all LumberJills, we want to hear about you and what you did in the war, and please get in contact. And it was amazing. We got 100 people came forward, families, some whose LumberJill family members had already passed away, but there were 60 ladies who, had responded. It was very exciting. And so then I had to go and visit them all, didn't I?
Wow.
Yeah. Did you just, the feeling, I mean, tell us about that feeling of sending out that press release. Like, were you so excited to get that sent out? And would you just wait by your computer to see who was going to respond?
I really didn't know. I mean, I felt a little bit like I was pushing my luck a bit, because I was so passionate about it. And I thought, well, I don't know. I thought, well, what if nobody comes back or I don't hear anything? And then what are we going to do if they do? I didn't know. So it was all very
What if this works?
Yeah.
Yeah, but slowly they started getting back in touch. And then it was like, oh, well, okay, what now, Well, of course I had to go and visit them, But I had to take it all offline because, the organisation weren't going to pay for that. So it was quite a big job. So, and then I was like, okay, well, this is my project now. I'm doing it now.
Which gives you full, creative ability, and you're not tied down. And that's, I think that we probably all benefit from that.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have any, of those boundaries you had to worry about, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
That is so interesting. So let's talk about, let's get into some of the stories about these women, and let's talk about the LumberJills. What is a LumberJill?
Okay. So, well, there's before the war, they were ordinary women. They were shop assistants, secretaries, hairdressers. Some of them were ballet dancers. Some of them worked in factories or in childcare. So really traditional female jobs, which was very normal in those days. The default destination for women was to become a housewife. So often they were encouraged into domestic work. But then, when the war came, so for someone like Dorothy, who was a hairdresser, she literally swapped a citizen comb for an axe and a crosscut saw. And within 1 month, there she was out in the forest, felling trees with an axe and a crosscut saw, doing it all by hand. No chainsaws then. And yeah, so they were doing all the same jobs as the men. They were felling these enormous trees, so everything from smaller trees like pine trees to the great big oak trees. Working in pairs on a crosscut saw, doing axe work. They were driving haulage trucks, transporting the loads to sawmills. They were working in sawmills, and doing the measuring work, which was really important for calculating the wages and the stock figures for the estate owners and the landowners, and calculating how much timber the government needed for wartime timber supplies. They were also doing planting work, so planting the trees. That was regarded as one of the lighter forestry duties at the beginning, so they were encouraged to work in nurseries and tree planting, and doing the measuring work. Yeah, so they just literally stepped into the boots of...
They did everything.
Yeah.
Why was it so integral part of the war?
Timber was really important. It was needed for it was the number one natural resource that we needed in wartime. So at the beginning of World War II, the UK was the largest timber importing nation in the world. We imported 96% of our timber. And that was because in World War I, we had felled almost half our forests and trees for the war effort. And that was the reason the Forestry Commission was set up in 1919, was to replant Britain's forests in case there was another war. Of course, 20 years later, that's not long.
Sure enough.
And so, the timber uses were main use was for pit props to go down the coal mines so that the miners could work underneath the ground. The pit props would hold the coal seams up while they were working underneath with a pickaxe. And they needed millions and millions of tons of wood for that, so that they could keep drawing coal, which was fueling all the industries of war. They also needed wood for railway sleepers, telegraph poles, wagon wheels and rifle butts, for packaging for bombs and army supplies, shipbuilding. There was quite a few planes that had quite considerable amounts of wood in their frames, so hurricanes and mosquito aircraft needed wood for their frames. And then there was also coffins and crosses and pulpwood for newspapers and paper.
Wow.
The list goes on
So
and
completely essential.
Absolutely vital.
All the things you wouldn't think about, all of these different
Millions
components
of
that it goes into,
of tons of
and
wood.
what role that, if we didn't have the LumberJills, who would have been doing it?
Yeah, well, all the young men had been signed up to go and fight in the war, so there really wasn't many
Right.
people left. Yeah.
Wow.
And then
Well, we don't want to give away the whole book because it's
People
very
need to read it.
interesting. People need to read it. So, can you tell us your favorite story, though?
yeah, my favourite story is about a lady called Bella Nolan, and she was one of the Scottish LumberJills. And yeah, so she was at work one day, and she heard her supervisor, Alan Stewart, saying he didn't think much of those ladies. They weren't that great. So she decided she'd go up to him and she'd say, well, okay, how about I challenge you to a crosscut felling duel? And he accepted. So the next day they worked either end of a crosscut saw together, and they worked all through the morning and into the afternoon, when he encouraged her. He said, you can stop now if you like. And she was like, I'm okay, thanks, I'll keep going. And then a little while later, he said, you've done fairly well. You can stop now if you like. But she had already decided, no matter how exhausted she was, and by this time she was absolutely, shaking with exhaustion, there was no way she was going to stop. And they both carried on working till the end of the day, and they had felled 120 trees between them.
Wow.
That's crazy. And what was it? Because I think I remember this maybe from early on in the book, but what was like a normal amount of trees for a
30,
day?
somebody said to me. 30, yeah. I met
30.
So I met this lady recently, 103, Jean, the Scottish lady, and she said she was felling 30 trees a day. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I briefly remember talking a little bit about the when it came to pay and how these women were paid compared to men in the same positions. Would you say it was just about half or less than half was the weekly wage?
It was, on average, it was less than half of what the men were being paid, mainly because they were not given the title skilled in their job titles. So the men were skilled fellers and the women were fellers, and so on.
So that was the differentiator of the pay.
Yeah, but then you find in newspapers of the time saying the men never intended women on taking over the jobs of skilled men.
But they did, so maybe pay them
Yeah.
correctly. And it was shillings, right? They were paid in.
Yeah.
Was it shillings?
Yeah.
Is that the right thing?
Yeah.
Shillings and pence?
Yeah, shillings and pence, yeah.
So, what percent of the stories in your book did you get to hear firsthand, and what percent was passed down from generations or family or things that you read about?
It's hard to say. I would say the majority are firsthand, the ones that when I actually met people. Some of because I live down south in England, I didn't get up to meet as many Scottish LumberJills as I would have liked, but I did find a lady that had interviewed some of the Scottish women, so bless her, Uyghur Robertson, she helped me with some of those Scottish stories. Yeah, so, but yeah, I still now have so much contact with the families and new families that come forward, sharing stories and letters and photographs, like amazing photographs. It's really wonderful, and I think there's a real pride in those families now for, a pride in their grandmothers and their mothers and great grandmothers in many cases as well. Lots of
Yes.
kids going into school and saying, "This was what my great grandma did in the wartime," and telling those stories. It's really lovely to hear.
It is pretty cool. I mean, the pictures that you have you have some pictures in the book, but you also have a picture book available on your website with all the research you've done. How did you get access? Were all these pictures in the Historical Society, or did some of the families share these pictures with you?
No, they are all from families. So
Wow.
all from the LumberJills. So everyone I met, I was like saying, "Can I take copies of your photographs?" And many of them with these tiny little ones, like that they had taken themselves in the forest. And it's amazing what you can do with them when you copy them and make them bigger. But yeah, just because at the beginning I really thought people won't believe me because this is such a hidden story. I have to have photographic evidence of it, and so that really motivated me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of my favorite pictures that you have it on those postcards was just the women cutting that. They're cutting a ginormous timber, and you just look at it and think, this isn't real, or they just made this recently type of thing. It's staged. But I also love I love this logo, the timber cord.
Oh yeah, me
with
too.
that. Joanna, you got to put that on a sweatshirt or something and sell it. I'd buy it.
Yeah.
I would love to I would love to wear that on a shirt. It'd be so cool. Let's talk about how the LumberJills evolved over the years and kind of what that was like after they maybe became, these super women in the forest, and then, kind of what that looked like for them afterwards.
So quite a few families that I speak to now, they talk about their mothers being, the LumberJills, being very modern mothers, they would take them down the end of the garden and they'd be there with a saw chopping up wood and taking them on adventurous holidays and things like that. And they describe it as being very modern, and I just think they're really strong, independent women. I mean, when I met them, I was like, oh, they're really cool. I've met my role models, I always felt that it would be nice to have a role model that was inspiring for me, and these women were it. I just thought they were feisty, but they were funny as well. My God, some of the stories they told, they're so funny. Just really, yeah, really pretty cool women, actually. Yeah, just from their experiences. I think, when you're thrown into this completely kind of new situation. You're a big group of women together. There's this incredible camaraderie and sisterhood, and there they were, felling 10-ton trees, driving haulage trucks, and working in sawmills and losing fingers in sawmills and things like that. And they just, and they just, I don't know, learned a lot. They learned a lot. Then they learned how to stand up for themselves as well. They had this physical confidence, that gave them that kind of confidence to stand in their own power and kind of look after themselves because they had to,
Right.
They're out in the forest.
Well, it's kind of like these are what those boys are off doing during the day. Like, I can do this,
Yeah.
Now that unknown isn't unknown anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, definitely. I think they saw a side of this is what equality feels like, This is what, I can do what you can do,
Right.
Right. So when the men came back from war, did any, from your accounts from everyone that you spoke with, did any of the women stay in those roles, or was that not really an option? Like they basically got kicked out of their jobs.
They were kicked out of their jobs, yeah. I mean, we had, on one side, we had like exhausted timber in our country. We couldn't go on felling. We felled nearly 50% of our timber in the Second World War. And so we really didn't have very much left at all. But there was, yeah, there was still work happening. Some of their jobs were given to prisoners of war. Those that got married, we had the marriage bar then, so they didn't continue working after that. And then they were encouraged back into their, traditional roles. One lady told me she was told that she needed to clean the hotel kind of front steps to the hotel, like for a month or something, to get back into domestic sort of work. Just really,
Wow.
yeah. But there was like, I think, I don't know how many, but 100, maybe more, of the measurers who were sent off to Germany to work in Germany, to requisition wood from Germany to rebuild Britain on that wood. So that's like a really interesting story. Yeah, but no, then
Wow.
maybe work in tree nurseries, that kind of thing. But yeah, they were quite upset because they weren't allowed to keep their uniforms or keep their jobs. And yeah, that was kind of the end of.
So these women have these amazing jobs. They love it. They have camaraderie. I mean, I don't know if I'd say they love it. It's hard work, but they make the most of it and they're happy to be out of the house. And then the men come back and they want them to go back to the old ways. And now you have these women who have independence.
Yeah, that was quite challenging for them. But it's like many of the ones that I met, I mean, some of them, of course, did get married, and so they had fallen in love. Often they stayed where they were working in the forest, and they kind of, fell in love with someone that lived nearby, and they stayed there. But quite a few of them went in to do youth work because they felt they had this incredible opportunity during the wartime, and they wanted to give that opportunity to other young people. Or they went into teaching. A few married farmers' sons and carried on ploughing the fields with a tractor, because they were quite useful in that scenario. But yeah, and they travelled a lot. Yeah, they were itinerant workers, so they were moving all over the country, and I think that gave them a real taste for travel. And there was a load of Canadian lumberjacks as well that came over to help, and so love was in the air for many of those ladies. And so they did actually fall in love, get married, and then to end up living in Canada. Yeah, a few in America and Australia too. Yeah,
That's cool to think about, just the impact that they had on the world wars, and it was such an essential part of having success. And so why do you think that they tried to erase this from history?
To begin with, I think it was just the prejudice against the women. The men didn't believe that the women could do this job, because they were, in the 1940s, they were regarded as the fairer sex, the weaker sex. And forestry was a tough man's job. And so many people just didn't really believe that they could do it. So there was a lot of, joking and ridiculing of the women. And they just found it quite irritating, really, kind of after a while. But also they were kind of hidden away in the forest, so, maybe out of sight. So that might have contributed to them being less well known. But also the work they were doing was, in scale of work, it was regarded as kind of agricultural work or land work. So it was perhaps more menial than other jobs. And at the beginning of the war, there wasn't a women's timber corps, there was only a women's land army, because they didn't believe that women could do the job. So often the women who became LumberJills were actually land girls first. And so and certainly when I first heard about the Women's Timber Corps, I didn't really understand whether they were part of the land army or not. So for the first 2 years of war, they were just the Women's Land Army forestry workers. But then by 1942, when the Battle of Atlantic started and timber imports stopped coming into our country, based on the success of the women who'd already been doing the job, they the government and the timber industries decided now we need to set up an official women's timber corps. So that was in 1942. And that was the first time in history where women were recruited and in their hundreds and sent to training camps up and down the country and trained in all those different types of work. Yeah, and given a badge.
Do you know how the women were recruited?
So there was rallies, and there was the head of the Women's Land Army was this utterly awesome woman from history called Lady Gertrude Denman, and she was director of the Westminster Press newspapers. She was writing about it and putting adverts in the papers. She was doing talks around the country. And they were just kind of like using her. She was also the chair of the National Federation of Women's Institutes, and they had thousands of groups across the country, and she was using all her networks through the WI movement to kind of encourage women to sign up for the Women's Land Army and the Women's Timber Corps as well. So yeah, she was an incredible woman, and she was so businesslike and set things up really quickly, and with incredible efficiency.
Wow, she sounds like she could have a whole book on just her.
Yeah, well, I have plans.
Ooh.
Yeah, maybe that's a good question. What are you working on right now?
Oh well, I'm coming to the end of novel 2, so I've got the history book and the photo book, which is all the historical side. But I know that more people read novels, and so I just wanted more people to know about this story. So I wrote my first novel and published that in 2022, and it's a series of 3. So I've nearly finished my second now.
Yeah, so you made some historical fiction novels based off of the stories that you heard.
That's right. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, because I know I talked to you before we started recording, but there's some stories in here that I'm like, there's more to that.
Yeah.
Comment, and I want to know what that is. You can probably have some pretty fun stories in there.
Definitely. I mean, the stories they told me, honestly, they had me laughing quite a lot with all the different things they were telling me. They're really getting up to mischief in the forest, and they were traveling around so much, and so they had a lot of freedom and a lot of fun, and you can just see it in the photographs. They're just having a great time, They did say it was like one of the best times of their lives.
Oh,
wow.
I was looking at the poems that you had in here, and the one, Pep Talk to LumberJills Everywhere, 1945. Do you feel suicidal and in despair? And then it's a poem that goes on. And I thought it was hilarious because it's like, what better way to get your feelings out? We're going to write a poem, publish it, and that's how I feel.
Yeah, I know. That's so good, isn't it? I know there's a whole story about those special issue undies as well. Yeah, very funny. They all told me that they had them sent to them and what they thought of them.
I wrote a poem just for you. Please read it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've done some incredible work, and thank you for bringing this history available to people like us so we can read it. And it's really fun to read, being somebody in the lumber industry and just hearing some of, their daily lives and, some of the lingo you even hear today working in lumber, being at sawmills, you hear them talking about in their stories. And so it's just, I don't know, it's another different level, deeper, like interesting to me just because of, it being related to lumber. And it's so cool that your passion has gifted us with all of this.
With history that would have otherwise been lost. So
yeah.
Thank you for all your work, and it's amazing. I want to read the novel. I didn't know about that, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, now it's a 3-parter, so we better get started on the first one.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. It's really lovely. I think, being out in the forest is quite timeless, isn't it? So there does have resonances through time. And one of the most amazing things about meeting the LumberJills was seeing this little smile pass over their faces and this happy look, and I would just sit there with them going, oh, they're back there, they're back in the forest, kind of this peace and happiness, and that they were thinking about all these funny stories that happened when they were with their friends that they were working with. Really, those sentiments really lasted a lifetime, because I was just contacted this week by a family saying, oh, we had my father's partner was a lumberjill, and she's asked for her ashes to be scattered where she lived, and she was 99 when she died. And we were sent on this whole long kind of like research thing. We actually ended up finding exactly where she had worked. Because of a letter she had written to someone in the 80s or something, which had been archived somewhere. And it was just, it was really, gave me goosebumps. It was so precious and amazing. And she spoke in the letter about how much she loved it there. And it was like wonderful, wonderful time. And loads of photographs of her just having fun, with her friends. Really, really makes it so rewarding when you can make those connections for families and they have that closure.
Right. That is so cool. I have one last question. Do you think that these stories could ever be made into a movie? Maybe it starts with your novel and somebody gets wind of the novels, I guess.
Yeah,
but don't you think it would be a good movie or film or documentary?
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of A League of Their Own. Because it's the whole. I love sporting kind of movies about kind of like the underdog, how they kind of triumph against adversity, and I think it's got that all over it. And there's such richness of stories and kind of mischief, but it's tough as well. There's all the emotions in there. Yeah, they did have some really tough times as well, but make an amazing movie, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I wanted to write the novels as well.
Well,
exciting.
thank you so much, and I would really appreciate if we could stay in touch and keep sharing these stories. They're so important. We forget that some of the struggles we face today, as just even being females in male-dominated industries, that this isn't anything new, and it's really inspiring to see other women who have been strong throughout time and put in their time and effort and really should be recognized for it. And they were very underappreciated. So I just thank you again for bringing that to light, and excited to keep learning more about the LumberJills.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna.